For early access plus exclusive content, facilitated discussions, live one-on-one Q&As, and more, become a patron at patreon.com/BrucePointset. What's up, everyone? It's Bruce. I'm back here, and today I have a special guest, Ursula Wolfe-Rocca with the Zinn Education Project. Ursula, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Yeah, so our connection actually goes back to my alma mater, Lake Oswego High School, where you were a social studies teacher for how long again?
I started in 2001. My first year teaching there was in September of 2001.
Oh, yeah, nothing important happened then.
Nothing important at all.
Nothing at all. But yeah, it's funny. You're actually, I'd say, a good part responsible for some of my engagement, specifically with like anti-racism work in LO, because I think I want to say it's 2015, 2016. It was one of those years where you reached out to, like, actually I didn't have you as a teacher, funny enough, but you'd reached out about an event I think some of the students were putting on, just talking about race in the schools. And it was also after a student, Cameron Leland, had put out this column about her experience as a Black student just in LOHS that, kind of just connected to me because I had, done a lot of my speaking out through writing. But I remember that event specifically because it was on the night of like a Blazer playoff game. And like,
terrible timing.
Yeah, no, like if people know me, like I will not, do things like in the name of basketball. And I guess now in this 2021 where we're talking about self-care, I guess it's more accepted. But anyways, I did, go out there anyways, and it was great to, I just remember, seeing the students speaking and then seeing kind of like the organization around it and, finding out, wait, LOHS had a BSU? Well, this is wild. But that kind of really I don't know, kind of lit a little bit of a fire in me to kind of get back active in the community. And just so happened my mother and Liberty Miller started my mother Willie Pointset, and Liberty Miller started a group, Respond to Racism, like 1-2 years later, that kind of put a container for that. But yeah, I just want to say, one, thank you for thinking of me for that, because it ended up being a very, I guess, I don't want to say transformative, but very, pivotal moment in just the work I do. So, again, thank you for thanking me for that.
Well, I am so sorry that we planned that for a playoff game night. I think we probably selected the date before we knew when the playoffs were going to be, perhaps. I didn't even remember that was a conflict of that I was forcing you to make that choice. So
no worries at all.
Apologies.
There's everything going on. Everything is a conflict these days. So no problem. But yeah, one of the reasons I really wanted to have you on is just because you're doing a lot of great work with the Zinn Education Project. And, I think, this idea of rethinking schools is so pertinent right now. But can you just, one, talk about like how long have you been with, or actually, can you just talk about what the Zinn Education Project is for those who don't know?
Sure. Yeah, and then I'm putting a pin in. I want to come back to what you shared about how you were impacted by me inviting you to come to the thing at LO, because I want to talk about how I was impacted by you before I even knew you in terms of my work at LO. But the Zinn Education Project is a project of two national social justice educational organizations, Teaching for Change and Rethinking Schools. And so those two national organizations have a project that they co-direct called the Zinn Education Project, which gets its name from Howard Zinn, who is, I'm sure everyone who would watch your podcast knows, is he's about to have his 100th birthday. He's no longer with us, but if he were, he would be turning 100 next year. And he was an activist historian who wrote a really famous book called The People's History of the United States. And so the project gets its name from Howard Zinn, and Howard Zinn was actually involved in helping to conceptualize the project. But it's basically a resource for K-12 teachers who want to infuse their curriculum or ground their curriculum in the stories of people who tend to be left out of a sort of, history that tends to in the textbooks tends to over emphasize presidents and laws and political history, formal political history over the lives of peoples, and particularly peoples who have been marginalized in both the past and the present. So we provide free downloadable lessons and resources for teachers to use in the classroom. And that's what the Zinn Education Project is.
And what, I guess, especially coming from an environment like LO, or working so long in an environment like LO, what attracted you to, I feel like it almost sounds obvious, but what attracted you to the Zinn Education Project, where you want to say, like,
Right.
This is what I really want to do?
Right. Yeah, I mean, the story of LO, and this, sort of intersects with the fact that we know each other through LO, and you also we're now sort of both engaged in different kinds of justice work. For me, when I came to LO, I had to hide the kind of history I wanted to do, and the kind of curriculum that I wanted to teach, and the kind of pedagogy that I believed in. And I should revise that and say, it's not that I had to hide it. I don't know if that's true. I felt that I did. And I behaved that way for, I would say, the first 8 maybe years that I was there, of the almost 2 decades that I was there. I was 24 years old. I'm a Portland native, and I had never been in Lake Oswego before I drove there for my interview at Lake Oswego High School. So Lake Oswego, to me, as an East Side Portland kid, was like a completely other world. It was just this place that you heard about, but I never had occasion to go there. So when I got there, I felt this strong sense of a need to, accommodate myself to the environment, and the environment was very anti-Zinn Education Project, and particularly in the social studies department. So the social studies department was sort of the most powerful voices in the social studies department were a kind of what I now would describe as sort of like white objective history kind of thing, where there's a sort of canon, and we want to prepare kids by teaching them that canon, and we want to be objective in the classroom, and teachers, kids should never know where teachers land on any given political issue. So I still was doing things like I was putting together a lesson on, which is now as an education project, a lesson on COINTELPRO, which involved me gathering lots of documents and teaching the kids about the FBI's war on the Black Freedom Movement. And I was, downloading documents from George Washington University that revealed CIA shenanigans in Chile in 1973. So I was doing that kind of work, but I was hiding it. I was not sharing that I was doing that in department meetings. I was hoping that the kids wouldn't rat me out when they had me for 11th grade and then went and had another teacher for 12th grade, you know.
Did you
It
ever
was just,
have any of those? Did that ever happen as far as like maybe not to like staff, but like I don't know, a parent
yeah.
coming in and being like,
Oh,
"You
definitely, yes. Yeah, definitely. I've had parent pushback at LO for sure, but not a lot. You know, I think one of the things about highly affluent schools is that teachers have a lot of freedom that they don't have elsewhere. And even though I am way to the left of the majority of the folks in LO, I was a good teacher. I was good to their kids. I taught them good skills. You know, kids tended to like me okay, you know, so you always have a couple folks who are unhappy with you, but generally I had a lot of freedom and very little very little resistance. But it's also like, I don't know how well you remember being an adolescent, but kids also just don't talk to their parents that much about what's going on at school.
yeah."
So, you know, every once in a while, you know, the main thing that I would get pushback at LO about was teaching Palestine. That was like a surefire every year. I would have Jewish parents who would accuse me of misteaching the truth about the history of the creation of the state of Israel.
There's a
So
little irony to that, isn't there?
right, absolutely. Well, it's the whole thing about, you know, that we've been seeing over the last decade about this, any critique of the state of Israel is itself anti-Semitism, which as a Jew, I 100% reject. So yeah. So, you know, getting back to the Zinn Education Project, you know, I was in college, I studied African American history, and you know, this was in the 90s, and so I'm in a department that was almost all Black, and you know, there were a lot of white people going into Black history, which you can see the evidence of now because there's a lot of great books on Black history that are written by white folks, but Black people in those departments were like, you know, meaning like, why are you here? It's a totally legit question. And when I decided to teach, like rather than go get a PhD, you know, a lot of people just said to me, my Black friends would say to me, like, just do not go teach like Black and brown kids. Like, just like go teach white people, you know, which is now just like this very common thing you hear all the time, right? Like white folks should be organizing white folks and white folks need to do anti-racism work with white folks. And so when I got my first interview was at Lake Oswego, I was like, oh my God, are the gods talking or what? Like, could you be in a place this is me, Ursula, who has never gone to Lake Oswego. I'm thinking to myself, oh my God, could you ever be in a place more white than Lake Oswego? So I was sort of dreading it. But I thought, well, this is the right place for me. And so, you know, I wanted to bring a curriculum to white kids that I thought would, first of all, reveal to them, you know, the inaccuracies in much of what they had learned, but also would absolve them of, I think, this really useless and paralyzing guilt that white people feel about racial injustice. So I think kids are they're like caught between this, like, you know, I don't want to know anything. Everything was great in the past and I don't want to learn about the injustices, or I want to learn about the injustices and then I'm like racked with a sense of powerlessness and guilt. And my feeling is like when you learn history, there's a lot of room between those two extremes, and that it's really can be really liberating as a white person. And I am going to pause and let you ask the question here. But so when I got to Lake Oswego, one of the things I immediately realized was like, well, wait a second, this school is not all white. Like, and I've said this to you, I know before, like, it's just shocking to me how that designation just is allowed to constantly be repeated by everyone in the community. Oh, we're so white, we're so white, we're so white, we're so white, we're so white. And on the one hand, you understand that, like, well, yes, that's true, like demographically speaking, 70 whatever %. but like, it's also so damaging and erasing of all the kids who are not white and all their families who are not white. And so then I sort of had to kind of change my perception of what I was there to do. Like, well, I'm not just here to, like, you know, hopefully raise the consciousness of white kids. Like, I'm also here to teach all my students, and my students are, lots of them are, you know, from Korean families, and lots of them are from Chinese families, and lots of them are South Asian. And I've got students from, you know, from the stands who maybe look white, but I don't know that they identify as white. And what about all the Persian kids, right? Who call themselves Persians and not Iranians? Like, what does that mean? And, you know, so there's like there was so much complexity in terms of, and then you have this tiny micro minority of Black kids who, you know, are, I think, like, we understand that anti-Blackness is the foundation for most forms of dehumanization that take place in the United States. And I think that is also true, absolutely, in terms of what you see at LO. But the population of Black kids was so small as to be, on the one hand, totally dismissible, and on the other hand, so small to be the perfect quantity to tokenize, right? And, you know, create this sort of hyper visibility. And it was a mess. It was just a mess. And then zero conversation about it at a like meta level in terms among the staff or parents that I was interacting with. I'm sure there were conversations going on that I didn't know about, but yeah. So that's sort of like, I came with my idea of what I would do, and then I confronted the reality, and it was really different in lots of different ways.
Yeah, and I really appreciate you kind of pointing out that idea of almost like using, you know, people like, it's so white here, but, and oh my God, what can we do? But also at the same time, or in the same breath, using that as an excuse not to do anything.
Right.
Like, it's a very, you know, just the how would I put this? Almost like, I don't want to call it a strategy, but it's this weird dynamic where, you know, you could acknowledge the problem and kind of sound like, you know, I'm so concerned, but, you know, there's just not enough of the rest of you here, I guess,
right,
for us to really, really do something. Except, again, like you pointed out, actually, we were there, like
right,
the
right,
whole time. We're there. We talked about it.
right.
So, you know, and also you talked about kind of the idea of not just, you know, not just raising the consciousness of white kids, but also, you know, looking after the different communities of color there. You know, that's another thing. I think, I want to say Cameron was talking about it that night we referenced, but just like, even, you know, I'm not sure when you started, as far as like making, you know, just offering the classroom up as just like a space to, you know, because sometimes people think about these huge actions, but I know something you were doing is just really just offering the classroom space up as a place for people to come, you know, hang out during like the breaks or during lunch. Like, it's
Right.
just simple stuff of creating space, creating, you know, again, when you're dealing with that hyper visibility, I know as a student, like, just
Right.
having some place where, you know, you could have like some kind of like peace of mind where you honestly like blend in, but
Right.
just not have all that, you know, yeah, all the when I think about class, just like, just use like English class example where you're just reading whatever text, and just like the word, you know, the word monkey comes up, not in any kind of a racial context, but you get like a bunch of kids in class
Right.
just looking at you,
Right. Oh
you
God,
like,
Bruce.
just
Yeah.
how deep some of that like
Oh
anti-blackness
yeah.
goes.
Right.
So yeah, that's a important part. So, you know, you started with, because you got involved with Zinn Education Project before you had left LO though, right?
Yes. Yeah. So so the way that happened is that so when I was coming up as a teacher, I was reading Rethinking Schools educational materials, which Rethinking Schools has been around for like over 30 years. So started in Milwaukee, in the early 1980s and became a national organization and is still with us and publishes books for teachers. And one of the, so when I was in teacher school and thinking of becoming a teacher, you know, was the first place I went to were Rethinking Schools books. And so I, you know, sort of came in armed with that ethos, which is very grounded in like Frary and the whole idea of like, you are teaching kids to read the word so that they can also read the world, right? So that they can act on the world and improve the world and make a more just society. So it is not a like, it is a very politically grounded sort of philosophy of teaching and education. And then in 2000, so in, I don't know, I guess around 2010, I started feeling like, okay, I'm pretty secure here at Lake Oswego. I'm an adult. I can start sort of taking some risks and being a little more public about, and again, like there's a ton, I have a ton of shame about that first decade of my time at Lake Oswego, because I really feel like you know, I let a lot of folks down, not like that they feel that way about me, but I feel that way about me, just in terms of how timid and scared I was and how I sort of let myself be coerced by the dominant ethos. So I started getting involved with the Organ Writing Project, which is the director of the Organ Writing Project is Linda Christensen, who your mom probably knows from PPS. She's a longtime teacher at Jefferson High School for over 40 years, and she is also an editor at Rethinking Schools. So I got through the Organ Writing Project, I started writing, and then I started publishing some of my lessons through the Zinn Education Project. And my big coming out party, and I think you'll appreciate this, about LO was when I wrote about the school foundation at LO in Rethinking Schools magazine. And I basically said, this is totally unjust. Which was a big deal because the school, I actually was a foundation teacher. I had been hired by the money that the parents in Lake Oswego, you know, contribute on top of their taxes, goes directly to schools and enables LO to keep class sizes relatively small compared to other districts, local districts.
Just for context, for people watching may not be familiar with the foundation, like if you drive through LO, you will see, you know, LO School Foundation lawn signs, banners going down the Country Club Road, which is kind of like the main road through,
which
like,
tells
the
you
high
everything
school and
you
everything.
need to know about LO.
You know, there's like
Country Club Road.
There is all this messaging that's very, very out there about, you know, LO schools need the money. LO schools, you know, what are we going to do if we don't get this money for the foundation? And it's, again, just a little bit of context when you're talking about one of the wealthiest school districts, one of the most well-resourced school districts in the state, you know, it's a little off-putting. I'll just put it that way.
Right. And so what I, you know, so for me, a teacher who had benefited from the foundation and who's not a member of the community, to write this piece that was like, look, if we lived in a just society, we would pay taxes into a general pool that were equally distributed to all the kids in the state, not just to, you know, I mean, the reason rich communities love school foundations is because they can keep the money in their community. Whereas, you know, if you pay into a general fund, it's going to be shared with those kids in North Portland, right, who aren't as deserving. And not that all parents, of course, feel that way. I mean, I know that I give money to my kid's school because I want my kid to be able to have band chairs that don't, like, you know, poke them because the plastic's broken on them, right? Like, this is not at all, it's a structural problem with the way that we fund education. But anyway, my point is that I wrote this really sort of, you know, critical piece about my own school foundation. And it was, you know, it's not like Rethinking Schools has a massive readership, but still it was like, you know, public. It was sort of me coming out um, and you know, the funniest part of it, Bruce, which I don't know if you experienced this when you published about LO, but it was like crickets. No one said a thing. And I knew people had read it. Like I knew there was enough evidence to know that folks had seen it, but no response. Like not even a, this is so disrespectful of you, or how could you say, just nothing. And that to me is exactly like, I don't know, that was so much worse. I had prepped myself for like being ready to defend myself, and then it was crickets. And it just made you feel like, oh, I don't even matter. Like it doesn't even matter what I say. And I don't know what your response was. Like I know you published that piece in that column in the Oregonian way back in, was it 2013 or 2000? I mean, it was
2012, 2013, I want to
yeah,
say.
something like that. And I, you know, that piece had a huge impact on me. And what I, you know, subsequently did at LO, but I didn't know you. And I felt like it would, you know, I wish that I had written you right away after I read it, and I didn't. But I wondered if you got did you get feedback from the LO community when you published that?
Yeah. So I got, you know, had people reach out, you know, wanting to, you know, kind of like I read this, and you know, racism is so bad, what can I do?
Mm-hmm.
And you know, had these meetings with people. I remember one was like actually at the country club of all places. But you know, it's twofold. So on one hand, like I did get responses, and you know, did set up meetings with people and tried to, you know, say, hey, use, one thing you can use is this money to, because I think when we talk about, like, especially with like the LO Schools Foundation, you know, there are definitely a lot of structural limitations to education reform. You mentioned specifically like the tax structure, and the fact that it often comes down to like foundations who can, you know, fill in versus, you know, areas where they don't have that. But then there's also in the places where they, like LO, where you do have that money, you do have those resources, then some of this stuff kind of comes down to will, right?
Right.
Like,
right.
Okay, you have the ability to do it, so why are you not doing it? And you get all these excuses. And I feel like that's kind of, you know, I would say after that piece, because that's still probably, not probably, is easily the most successful thing I've written to date. Like I kind of feel like, you know, a one-hit wonder almost, of just like, oh, I had that one, went viral, and then not really tried to recreate that. But you know, it's just not, I don't think I've had anything that's come anywhere close to, you know, being that read. But also, you know, there's like a little bit of bitterness, honestly, that comes from it, because not so much from the piece going viral and that being like the biggest thing, but because you have these conversations and you talk about, well, use your money, and not just use your money, but like, you know, I just as a reporter, I, you know, got connected with organizations, got connected with people doing kind of the work people say they want to see. And I was like,
Right.
you know, you could support this, or you could support that, or you could support this person, or support this organization, or you could do this, do that. And then it's kind of like, it felt like the end goal for the people meeting with me was just to meet with me and say, well, I talked with him and we had a meeting, high five, it's over. And, you know, there wasn't much, again, the will to actually to move on some of these things. So like I said, I'll admit, like because I even wrote a piece about it, and I called it like, basically I compared sort of like the engagement in LO to like almost like BDSM, where it's like people come to hear you, you know, castigate, you know, the whiteness of the community, and like it's almost a show for them. But they go home and, you know, it's over. There's no action after that. It's just, hey, you know, poke at my guilt, you know,
Right.
I want to feel something, and
Right.
then it's over.
Right.
So, I'll admit, like, that's kind of why, circling back to, that event that you invited me to, where again, it was kind of like seeing that, these kids have formed the BSU, seeing some of these other kids speaking, seeing like, these seeds of organization, and saying, okay, maybe there's some hope.
Right.
There's something here. I don't have all the answers, but I've gone through college, and come back, and I've worked in journalism, worked around these nonprofits, and seen some of these, seeing what people can do if they use some intentionality. It's like,
Right.
okay, maybe I can help out a little bit with this. And so that's been,
Right.
that's been its own journey, and been the positives, and also, again, the limitations. Like
Right.
with LO, I don't know how much you can get into it, but around a little bit after that time, LO as a school district started, it felt like, at least in their messaging anyway, started to say, okay, well, we really want to take equity seriously. And, you know, is hit and miss. And
Yeah.
yeah, like I said, that also happened to be around, the time where you were on your last
Right.
legs out of there. So
Right.
again, I'm not sure if any of that just came from just time to move on, or like I
Yeah.
don't know, frustration. But
Yeah.
can you
I mean,
speak
if
on any of
so,
that?
yeah. I mean, so many different things are coming to mind. I mean, one, I I just want to get back to that piece, that 2012 piece, because to me, what regularly happens, that the pattern at LO around racism was that there would be a crisis of some kind. And, the crisis could almost always be reduced to white kids behaving badly in a way that was like unmistakably racist. And then the community like tearing their hair out. Oh my God, this is so awful. How could this possibly happen? Ah! And then, so that's like stage one is the bad thing. Stage two is the what you talked about, like the self-castigation, like, oh my God, this is so terrible. And then stage three is like, this is not who we are. And then stage four is those people who were saying that something's terribly wrong are overreacting, and it's like retrenchment. And then there's a crisis, and then we self-castigate, and then, right? And so I finally had been at LO long enough to see this pattern like over and over and over again. And it was such a clear pattern. And your piece was an example of the fact that you were not the first, but it was around that time where I was like, okay, I don't have to be this timid, like I have been here long enough, my job's secure, I can speak up a little more. And your piece was like one of those times where I was so able to tangibly say to the staff, like, there is no mystery about what's going on here, if only we are willing to listen and believe and then act on what we're being told by our students of color, by our staff of color, by white people who see it, or at least see enough of it to recognize it. Like there's no mystery. And so my first big thing was that we organized this massive PD for teachers I think it was the beginning of the year, maybe it was the end of the year, I can't remember because I'm old, middle-aged, where we had someone come and do a professional development with the whole staff. It was the first time we'd ever had like any kind of anti-racist thing. And I think it was on like, I don't know, it was like weak sauce. It was like on like I don't know, unconscious bias or something like that.
Mhm.
And then, so basically my deal with Bruce, the principal, Bruce, not you,
Mhm.
Mr. Plato, was that he would get one part of the PD, that is like he would bring in his outside consultant, who I think was a former teacher, was a former person in PPS. And then for the second half, we, the teachers who had been part of this sort of working group that wanted to work on racism in LO, would get the second half. And we, the teachers, decided to have everybody in the room, all like 80 people in the room, read your column and do some work with what they found there. And Bruce, it was such a shit show. And I won't like go into all the details, but I will say that sort of every strategy of whiteness was on full display, including teachers talking about like who you had been in their classes. Like we don't have to take this seriously because this kid once, you know, did, I mean, which was also just total bullshit, I'm sure. I mean, it was all just total bullshit, but like, it was so much worse than I ever could have imagined. And there were some teachers, I mean, there were lots of teachers who were fully engaged and fully on board and so appreciative. So of course I am remembering those ones who were not. And to me, that is the reason I wanted to tell you that story, was one, because it's around your work, but also it was the problem then and it was the problem now, or at least as recently as I was at LO, in that there is a just really powerful resistance by a really powerful sort of cadre of folks within the district to actually saying, this is us. Like, it's one thing to have someone come in and talk to you about unconscious bias. It's another thing to read a column written by a Black student from LO about LO and say, okay, what is this? What can we learn here then about changes we need to make? And the first is acceptable for LO. The second, I think, is not. I mean, that's been my experience. So I don't know if that resonates at all with you, but.
Well, I'm pretty sure I can guess, not all, but some of who said those things.
Right.
Because some of those same teachers would end up inviting me back to, you know, present to social studies teachers. I think it was like a couple years ago, actually. And, you know, it was like, I went, I did it. It was fine. But, you know, it's just one of those things where it's like, I know you. I remember you. I remember. And like, I wasn't a perfect kid, right? Like I slept in class a lot. I will admit it. But like, also, you know, I was a basketball player.
Right.
I was in band. I got good grades. So, you know, sleep was not, I didn't get a lot of sleep. I was exhausted. But
well, and for the record, perfection is not the requirement to be able to tell your story about your experience of going to school. Like, it was so absolutely ridiculous. Like, I mean, that's what I mean. It was like every possible technique, I mean, that people use to dismiss the stories of people of color was being pulled out. And I mean, that's what I mean about Bruce Poinsett. Like, you know, it isn't like, do you know what I mean? It was not as if you were some kid who was like everybody's worst headache, you know? I mean, so anyway, it was just absolutely, and I'm sure you do, can imagine, I could name like department and gender and you would probably be able to, you know, figure out the people. But this is the terrifying thing, Bruce, is that I think there were also people that you would never expect who were like, well, I'm sure that that was Bruce's experience. But on the other hand, you know, this is the very, I think, pernicious sort of, we need to be balanced and we need to hear both sides. And there's also, you know, white kids who get bullied and, you know, all that other, these other sort of more pernicious ways of denying the existence, the perniciousness, the persistence of racism at LO.
Yeah. And, you know, funny, because I was just thinking about that piece now, because I wrote it in response to, an incident that happened. You know, I graduated in 2007. This was 2012. So it was in response to a Black football player, you know, getting bullied by his teammates at LOHS. And, you know, when I think about what you're talking about as far as that response and trying to like, you know, make all these excuses to not take, you know, people's insights, their perspectives, their memories, experiences at LO seriously, because that student would then go on to transfer to Lake Ridge, the other high school in LO, where among other incidents, he was literally physically assaulted by an assistant football coach, you know, after this incident that made all the rounds on local news. After all of that, he goes to the other school. And again, I want to repeat this for people watching, was physically assaulted by an assistant football coach. You know.
and when that child spoke, and I want to emphasize child, these are children, spoke up at our high school, he was absolutely treated with what I would describe as character assassination by the staff. Like not a trustworthy, not a credible source. I mean, there were text messages. This was not like subtle what had happened to this child. And you know, in that incident, I don't know if I've ever told you this story, Bruce, a few of us wanted to, this is so laughable and naive. I was so naive back then. But we, had this staff meeting, like this emergency staff meeting about like, you know, this child was called the N-word over text messages. Like, we need to do something about this. We need to do something. And obviously we were going to be doing stuff internally at school, but we felt like we needed to do something for the community, like say something publicly facing. And Andrew Duden had this great, what I thought was a fantastic idea, which is we, the staff, anyone who wanted to sign on, it wasn't going to be something that like everyone had to sign, but it was going to be a collective letter by the staff of Lake Oswego High School, written to the community, published in the Lake Oswego Review, where we would apologize on behalf of the students at Lake Oswego, because we were going to sort of use the reasoning that if my kid kicks somebody else's kid at the playground, I apologize to the parent and to that kid because I'm the adult in charge, right? Like, it's my kid who's misbehaving on my watch. And so we thought like the adults would come out and write an apology and say, we recognize that this incredible harm was done. We recognize that at some level, the fact that students felt empowered to use this word in this way to do harm is a failure of our education of them. And we resolved to continue to try to, you know, teach for justice and teach kids, right, not to be racist. I mean, which to me, Bruce, just seemed like the least we could do, right? Like, we're teachers, we hold a important place in the community. And so began the great apology debate of 2014 or whenever it was, whatever year it was. People, other staff were furious at that idea. I will not apologize for something I didn't do. I didn't say that word. I mean, it was unbelievable. And we finally, you know, after weeks and weeks of this, Andrew actually saved all the emails in case we ever wanted to write a book about this. And I'm joking about that. We're never writing a book about it, but back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And I mean, the fact that teachers could not come together to issue an apology on behalf of the staff for what had happened to a 15-year-old, I think, child, it's just, to me, like, it's so damning. I don't know if that, like, if I conveyed to you the why it was so damning, but yeah, that was a formative moment for me. Something died in me, in my belief in the possibility of redeeming my school at that incident.
Yeah, no, that makes sense, because yeah, again, just I just keep going back to, there was a choice to say something at a moment where it should have been really easy to say something. And the reason, you know, just in general, where we're like, hey, you should take a stand because this could get worse. And let me repeat for the third time, transferred and was assaulted, physically assaulted by an assistant football coach at the next school of the same district. But, you know, people could have attempted to intervene, attempted to build a different culture, but such as LO. But you know, I want to first of all say thank you for taking way more time than I told you this would take on this.
Not your fault, because I had too many stories I wanted to tell you.
But I did want to bring it back to the Zinn Education Project, because I've been lucky enough to, in addition to like the free online resources, and there really is a lot, even just simple stuff as far as like this day in history, you know, posts that I think people should really be tuning into. But, you know, I think a couple of things I got to participate in as a part of, you know, just like a guest of some of these events. One more recently was, I think it was like teaching hip hop in the classroom with Jeff Chang and Davey D. Yeah. And, you know, that was awesome. But then also you're part of this, I guess, would you call it like a mock workshop on the color of law that, you know, and kind of taking, you know, when we talk about, because you talk about bringing in facilitators, and that's been a big, you know, we talk about the realities of equity, or equity versus the rhetoric around equity. And with some of these people that the district has brought in, you talk about especially like unconscious bias training and all this stuff. And I always just get this feeling like, really, we're doing the eight, because people will always tell you, you know, I don't think the community is ready for this, or, you know, all these things is ridiculous. Like, you know, we're talking about grown adults, grown adults, active voters, active people in their political. I think they can handle, you know, talking about it's not even reading the color of law. It is talking about concepts from the color of law, assisted with videos, sheets you can walk around and write your own thoughts on. Like, but can you just talk about maybe some other, you know, like interactive activities that Zinn Education Project does? Kind of give people an idea.
Yeah, and I'll just do two. One is the online classes are really fantastic, and they're free, and we love to have people. They're sort of geared towards educators, but anyone finds them, I think, anyone I know who's attended them finds them really interesting. So we have them usually once a month, and you can find them on the website, which is just zinnedproject.org. And we have one that I just want to really sell to you, since we're here talking about education, on December 6th with Dr. Jarvis Gibbons, who wrote a book called Fugitive Pedagogy about Carter Woodson and the tradition of radical Black teachers. And And so he will come and so Dr. Givens, who's an academic, will come and talk about his book with two K-12 teachers, about sort of both what you might bring into your classroom if you are a teacher, but also just to sort of like, what are the dominant narratives, and how do those dominant narratives sort of erase the long, rich legacy of Black educators and Black education as a form of resistance. So I really encourage folks to come to that. And then the other thing is that we have all these lessons that at the Zinn Education Project that work for workshop settings, for community organizing groups. So they're for the classroom, but one of the things, getting back to Freire, that my friend Bill Bigelow always quotes Freire as saying is that, we need more politics in our pedagogy, and we need more pedagogy in our politics. And that last part, we need more pedagogy in our politics, I think really has to do with political education. Like, when we all need political education, right? Like, I am trying to understand the housing crisis in Portland, and I really don't have enough information, and I am seeking that information. So when we're trying to offer political education to people about these really difficult, complex problems, we need to think about how we're delivering that information, because not everybody's just going to be able to like read a text and like a long, dense, multi-paged text and be moved to act based on that. And so we really need to think about, how do you get people in a room together or on a Zoom together, talking about thorny issues, learning some history, coming to consciousness about how we might act. And so I am always trying to encourage community organizing groups to use materials at the Zinn Education Project, but also to use the pedagogy that we sort of promote to think about how they might bring it to their own, to be used for their own purposes. So if you're organizing around, environmental racism, or you're organizing around housing, or you're organizing around food sovereignty, whatever it is, like have a pedagogical approach that's more likely to engage your target audience, which is what good teachers do, right? Mm-hmm. So that's my plug.
Yeah. Ursula, thank you again for taking the time. Just lastly, as far as, if people want to get involved, support the Zinn Education Project, I can see behind you the poster, but I'm just assume, maybe someone's listening to this while washing dishes or something. So can you just tell people where they can find more about Zinn Education Project and how they can get involved or support?
You're right. So Zinn Education Project is on all the big social media, and I do not I only do Twitter. But I believe that Zinn Education Project has a big presence on both Facebook and somewhat on Instagram. And then it is zinnedproject.org is the website. And it's all, once you register, everything is free and downloadable and available. So we really want it to be accessible to the people, for the people, people's history.
Awesome. Yeah. Ursula Wolfe-Rocca, thank you again, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, Bruce.
Thank you for watching. Please like and share and subscribe so you can stay up to date on all the latest videos. Thank you.